In the winter of 1867, Warsaw was a city under siege not by armies, but by silence. Poland had been erased from the map, swallowed by the Russian Empire, and forbidden to speak its own language, teach its own history, or dream its own future. In a modest apartment on Freda Street, a baby girl was born into this world of whispered Polish and hidden textbooks. Her name was Maria Skłodowska. The world would one day call her Marie Curie, but first she had to survive. Her father, Władysław Skłodowski, was a physics and mathematics teacher once respected, now demoted to a lowly school inspector by Russian authorities for his patriotism. Her mother, Bronisława, ran a prestigious boarding school for girls until the state shut it down for teaching Polish culture. By the time Maria was 10, her mother had died of tuberculosis, and her family lived in quiet poverty, renting rooms to students to survive. Yet in that dim apartment, something extraordinary grew, a love of learning. Maria devoured books and secret Polish poetry hidden beneath Russian-approved texts, science manuals copied by hand. She excelled in school, graduating first in her class at 15. But higher education was forbidden to women in Russian Poland. Undeterred, she and her sister Bronisława made a pact. Maria would work as a governess to fund Bronisława's medical studies in Paris. In return, Bronisława would later help Maria. For nearly 5 years, Maria lived as a governess in remote manor houses, teaching children by day and studying physics, chemistry, and calculus like candlelight at night. She endured loneliness, exploitation, and heartbreak, including a forbidden romance with the son of her employers, ended by his family's class prejudice, but she never stopped learning. In her journal, she wrote, "One must not fear poverty. One must fear only the lack of freedom to think." In 1891, at age 24, she finally boarded a train to Paris. She carried little, a suitcase, a dictionary, and a heart full of hunger. She enrolled at the Sorbonne, the only major European university that admitted women, and changed her name to Marie. She rented a garret room with no heat, survived on bread and tea, and often fainted from hunger during lectures. Yet she thrived. In 1893, she became the first woman to earn a degree in physics from the Sorbonne, finishing first in her class. A year later, she earned a second degree in mathematics, second in her class. It was during a physics research project that she met Marie Curie, a quiet, brilliant professor who shared her disdain for fame and her devotion to pure science. He was captivated not by her beauty, but by her mind. "You speak of atoms as if you've met them," he told her. Their partnership would change the world. But in those early Paris winters, huddled over notebooks in unheated rooms, Marie had no idea that the very element she would soon discover radiant, beautiful, and deadly was already whispering in her bones. Paris in the 1890s was a city of light, but not the kind Marie Curie sought. While the Eiffel Tower sparkled with electric bulbs and cabarets glowed with gaslight, Marie was drawn to a deeper, stranger luminescence, the mysterious rays emitted by uranium salts, recently discovered by Henri Becquerel. She chose this phenomenon for her doctoral thesis, the first woman in France to pursue a PhD in science. Working in a drafty shed behind the School of Physics and Chemistry, she and Pierre began testing every known element. They used an electrometer of Pierre, his own invention, to measure activity, a term Marie coined. Most elements were inert, but one sample pitchblende, a uranium ore, was 4 times more active than pure uranium itself. "It cannot be," Marie whispered, "unless the ore contains a new element." It was a radical idea. Elements were the building blocks of matter, unchanging, eternal. To claim a new one existed was to challenge the periodic table itself. But Marie trusted the data. Night after night, she stirred boiling cauldrons of pitchblende in her shed, breathing fumes, her hands raw from acid. Pierre, moved by her conviction, abandoned his own research to join her. In July 1898, they announced the discovery of polonium named in secret tribute to Marie's forbidden homeland. But the glow persisted. There was more. By December, after processing tons of ore by hand, they isolated a second substance infinitely more active, emitting a faint blue light in the dark. They named it radium, from the Latin radius, meaning ray. The world was stunned. Scientists doubted. Journalists mocked. But the Curies refused to patent their process. Radium belongs to the people, Marie said. It is not for profit. They worked in near poverty, rejecting offers from industry, spending their own money to buy more pitchblende. Their lab had no proper ventilation, no fume hoods, just open windows and faith. They didn't know it, but with every breath, they were inhaling death. Yet in that shed, surrounded by vials that glowed like captured stars, Marie found joy. "I have seen the light of a new world," she wrote, "and it is beautiful. But light, she would learn, casts long shadows." By 1900, the name Curie echoed through scientific circles, but not always with respect. Pierre and Marie had published dozens of papers, isolated radium in pure metallic form, and defined a new field, radioactivity. Yet when the French Academy of Sciences nominated candidates for the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903, only Pierre Curie and Henri Becquerel were listed. Marie's name was absent. The omission was no accident. Women were not considered serious scientists. They were assistants, wives, or curiosities. But Pierre, furious, refused to accept the nomination without Marie. "Our work is inseparable," he wrote to the committee. It would be unjust to exclude her. Behind the scenes, Swedish physicist Magnus Gichte Middag Leffler intervened. He alerted Marie to the snub and lobbied the Nobel Committee. In a rare move, they added her name just weeks before the announcement. On December 10, 1903, Marie Skłodowska-Curie became the first woman ever to win a Nobel Prize. But triumph came with a price. The press didn't celebrate her intellect. They fixated on her gender. Headlines read, "A woman in the Temple of Science," and "Madame Curie, housewife or genius?" Photographers camped outside her modest apartment. Strangers asked if she cooked dinner for Pierre. Few mentioned that she had written the theoretical framework for radioactivity, or that she had processed tons of pitchblende by hand while he continued his crystallography research. Worse, the scientific establishment remained skeptical. When she applied for a position at the Sorbonne in 1906 after Pierre's death, the all-male faculty rejected her, despite her Nobel credentials. It took public outcry and Pierre's legacy to force them to reconsider. She became the first female professor in the Sorbonne's history, teaching in the very lecture hall where she once sat as a student, shivering in an unheated coat. Yet Marie refused to play the victim. She wore black for the rest of her life, not just in mourning for Pierre, but as armor against distraction. She cut her hair short, dressed plainly, and spoke only of science. "I have no dress except the one I wear every day," she told a reporter. "If you are going to be kind enough to give me one, please let it be practical and dark." Her laboratory remained a humble shed, now filled with glowing glass tubes of radium that cast an ethereal blue light at night. She carried vials in her pocket, unaware that the very substance that brought her fame was silently destroying her bone marrow. She suffered chronic fatigue, cataracts, and lesions on her hands, but she never stopped working. In 1906, she took Pierre's chair at the Sorbonne. On her first lecture, hundreds gathered, not just students, but journalists, skeptics, and scientists who doubted a woman could hold such a post. She walked to the podium in silence, placed her notes on the desk, and began, "Gentlemen," the traditional greeting. Then she paused, looked up, and said firmly, "And ladies." The room fell still. In that moment, she did not just teach physics. She rewrote the rules of who belonged in science. But the world was not ready to let her be simply a scientist. It wanted a symbol, a martyr, a mother, a miracle worker. And soon it would demand more than she could give. April 19th, 1906, began like any other spring day in Paris gray skies, wet cobblestones, the scent of chestnut blossoms in the air. Marie Curie walked to the laboratory at the Sorbonne, her mind already on the day's experiments. She expected to find Pierre there, as he always was, bent over his notes, humming softly, lost in the quiet music of atoms. But Pierre never arrived. He had been crossing the Rue Dauphine in the rain when a horse-drawn wagon, its driver blinded by fog and mud, struck him. He fell. His skull cracked against the pavement. He died instantly, just 46 years old, at the height of his powers, in the middle of a sentence he never finished. Marie collapsed when they told her. For days she sat in silence, clutching his laboratory notebook like a prayer book. She refused to speak. She stopped eating. She wrote in her journal, "My Pierre, my love, my soul, you are gone, and I am nothing." The world mourned a genius. The French Academy of Sciences offered her Pierre's chair a gesture of respect, but also a test. Could a widow, a foreigner, a woman, possibly fill his place? Many hoped she would decline, retreat into grief, and leave science to men. But Marie Curie did not retreat. She returned to the lab just weeks after his death. She wore black for the rest of her life, not as a symbol of sorrow, but as a vow. No more distractions. No more vanity. Only work, only truth. She took over his teaching duties, became the first female professor at the Sorbonne, and continued their research with a quiet ferocity that stunned even their closest colleagues. In the shed behind the school, the radium still glowed. She would sit for hours in the dark, watching the blue light pulse like a heartbeat. It was beautiful, dangerous, alive. She began carrying small vials, in her pocket comforting talismans of the work they had built together. She didn't know it, but with every breath, she was inhaling death. Her two daughters, Irene and Eve, became her anchors. Irene, just 9, showed an uncanny aptitude for mathematics. Marie taught her to read scientific papers before fairy tales. "Science is the poetry of reality," she told her, "and poetry is how we survive." Yet grief never left. She kept Pierre's clothes in his closet. She set a place for him at dinner. On the anniversary of his death, she walked alone to the cemetery in Celle, rain or shine, and sat without speaking until nightfall. But in the lab, she transformed pain into purpose. She completed their work on radium's atomic weight. She isolated pure metallic radium, a silvery white metal that glowed faintly in the dark. In 1910, she published the definitive treatise on radioactivity, a 1,000-page masterpiece that became the Bible of nuclear physics. The Nobel Committee took notice again. In 1911, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, becoming the first person, and still the only woman, to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. But this time, the world did not celebrate. Scandal erupted, not for her science, but for her heart. A private affair with physicist Paul Langevin, a married former student of Pierre's, was leaked to the press. The same newspapers that once called her the angel of science now branded her a foreign homewrecker. Crowds gathered outside her home, shouting insults. One threw a stone through her window. She hid the girls in the countryside, terrified. For the first time, Marie considered leaving France, leaving science altogether. But then she remembered Pierre's words, "You must never let the world silence you." She went to Stockholm anyway, alone, without friends, without defenders. She accepted her second Nobel Prize, not for herself, but for the truth. And in that moment, she chose to keep carrying the light, even as it burned her bones. In the years before the Great War, radium was not just a scientific discovery, it was a cultural obsession. The same blue glow that haunted Marie Curie's laboratory now lit up shop windows, beauty salons, and patent medicine catalogs across Europe and America. Radium was hailed as a miracle, the cure for arthritis, impotence, gout, acne, and even old age. Companies sold radium-laced toothpaste, chocolates, suppositories, and face creams that promised eternal youth. In New Jersey, young women painted watch dials with radium-based paint, licking their brushes to a fine point, unaware they were ingesting death with every stroke. Marie watched this madness with growing horror. She had never claimed radium was a cure. She had only studied its properties. Yet her name was plastered on quack products she despised. Radier, face cream, Revigator, radium water jars. Even Radioactive, a radioactive tonic that would later kill industrialist Eben Byers after he drank 1,400 bottles. She tried to warn them. In lectures and letters, she insisted radioactivity was not a toy. It was a force that could destroy as easily as it illuminated. But no one listened. The public wanted magic, not caution, and businessmen saw profit, not peril. Worse, the scientific community remained divided. Some doctors used radium to shrink tumors, a legitimate early form of radiation therapy. Marie supported this and even donated precious radium to hospitals. But others used it recklessly, burning patients' skin, causing ulcers and triggering cancers. Marie's own hands were scarred from radiation burns, her eyes clouding with cataracts. She suffered chronic fatigue, bone pain, and recurrent infections. Yet she refused to acknowledge the danger not out of ignorance, but out of devotion. If radium is dangerous, she once said, then we must learn to handle it safely, not abandon it. In 1911, the same year she won her second Nobel Prize, she faced a personal crisis that mirrored the public's betrayal. A tabloid scandal erupted over her relationship with physicist Paul Langevin, a married man and former student of Pierce. The press, which once called her the saint of science, now branded her a foreign homewrecker. Crowds gathered outside her home in Paris, shouting insults. One threw a stone through her window. Fearing for her daughters, she fled to the countryside. For weeks, she considered leaving France forever. But she returned. Not for fame, but for science. She knew that if she disappeared, radium would be left in the hands of charlatans. Someone had to guard the truth. When World War I erupted in 1914, she saw her chance to redeem both her name and her element. She proposed a radical idea: mobile X-ray units for battlefield hospitals. Using radon gas, a radioactive byproduct of radium, she could power compact X-ray machines that would help surgeons locate bullets and shrapnel in wounded soldiers. The French military was skeptical, but Marie didn't wait for permission. She sold her Nobel Prize gold medals to fund the first unit, though the French National Bank refused to accept them, returning them out of respect. She converted a Renault van into the first Petites Curies, a mobile radiology lab. She learned to drive, repair engines, and operate X-ray equipment. She trained 150 women, including her 17-year-old daughter Irene, to run the units. Together, they brought light to the darkest corners of the war. By 1918, over 20 mobile units were operating near the front lines. Marie estimated they helped over 1 million soldiers. She never charged a franc. She never sought recognition. In the glow of those battlefield X-rays, radium found its true purpose, not as a potion for vanity, but as a tool of healing. And Marie Curie, once vilified, became known as the angel of the battlefield. Yet even as she saved lives, the poison in her bones deepened. She coughed more. Her fingers trembled. But she kept working, because the light, however dangerous, was still worth carrying. When the guns of World War I thundered across Europe in 1914, Marie Curie did not retreat to her laboratory. She turned it into a fortress of mercy. While governments debated strategy and generals counted casualties, She saw a battlefield where science could save lives and redeem radium's tarnished name. Her idea was radical: bring X-ray diagnostics to the front lines. At the time, X-ray machines were massive, stationary, and required city power grids. But Marie knew that radon gas, a radioactive byproduct of radium, could power compact, portable units. She proposed a fleet of mobile radiology labs, vans equipped with X-ray tubes, dynamos, and darkrooms staffed by trained women who could operate them under fire. The French military dismissed her. "This is no place for a woman," they said, "especially not a foreigner." But Marie had stopped waiting for permission decades ago. She began alone. She donated her own radium, her most precious scientific asset, to extract radon for the first units. She sold her furniture to buy a Renault van. She learned to drive, change tires, and repair engine, skills unheard of for women of her stature. In the garage of the Radium Institute, she converted the van into the first Petites Curies, a mobile X-ray station painted in military gray, with a glowing tube that hummed like a heartbeat in the dark. Then she trained others. She taught nurses, students, and even her 17-year-old daughter, Irene, how to position wounded soldiers, develop glass photographic plates, and interpret bone fractures. "You must not flinch," she told them. "Every second counts. A bullet near the spine can mean life or paralysis." By 1916, she had 20 mobile units roaming the Western Front. She drove one herself, often through shellfire and mud, to field hospitals just miles from the trenches. Soldiers, pale and bleeding, would stare in awe as this small, black-clad woman in a fur hat adjusted dials and revealed the hidden metal inside their bodies. Surgeons called her the angel with the light in her hands. She worked 18-hour days. She slept in barns. She ate cold rations. She inhaled radon fumes daily, her fingers blistered, her vision worsening. But she never complained. "These men give their blood for France," she wrote. "I give only my time." Her efforts saved over 1 million soldiers. One general estimated that her X-rays reduced amputation rates by 30%. Yet she refused payment, patents, or medals. When the Red Cross offered her a stipend, she declined. "This is not charity," she said. "It is duty." But the war took its toll. In 1918, her youngest daughter, Eve, fell ill. The Radium Institute stood nearly empty, its funds exhausted, its staff at the front. Marie herself collapsed from exhaustion and was hospitalized for what doctors called chronic radiation sickness, though the term didn't yet exist. Still, she returned. Even after the armistice, she traveled to battlefields to recover lost equipment. She advocated for radiology departments in every French hospital. She wrote a manual radiology in war that became the global standard. And in every soldier she saved, in every X-ray image that guided a surgeon's hand, radium found its true purpose, not as a miracle cure for vanity, but as a quiet, precise tool of healing. The world had called her a sorceress for playing with invisible rays. Now they called her a saint. But Marie Curie knew the truth. She was neither. She was simply a woman who refused to let light go to waste. In 1921, Marie Curie received an unexpected letter from across the Atlantic. It was from a group of American women journalists, scientists, and philanthropists, led by New York Evening Mail editor Marie Maloney. They had read about her struggles, her empty laboratory, her lack of radium, her failing health. They knew that a single gram of radium cost $100,000 more than she could ever afford. And so they made her an offer. "Come to America, and we will give you a gram of radium for free." Marie was skeptical. She hated publicity. She distrusted ceremonies. But she also knew that without radium, her research would stop. And so, at age 54, she boarded the SS Olympic with her daughters Irene and Eve, bound for a country she had never seen. She arrived in New York on May 19, 1921, to a scene she could never have imagined. 20,000 people lined the docks. Bands played the Marseillaise. Women waved French and American flags. Reporters shouted questions in English and broken French. For a woman who had spent her life in quiet laboratories, it was overwhelming. "I am not a celebrity," she whispered to Irene. "I am a scientist." But America saw her as both. Over the next 6 weeks, she was feted like a queen. She rode in a ticker-tape parade down Broadway, the first woman ever to receive the honor. She met President Warren G. Harding at the White House, where he presented her with a golden key to a lead-lined casket containing 1 gram of pure radium, purchased entirely by public donations from American women's school children and factory workers. The gesture moved her to tears. "This radium is not mine," she said in her acceptance speech. "It belongs to science. It will be used for healing, not for profit." Yet beneath the celebrations, tension simmered. The U.S. press, fascinated by her fame, pried into her private life. They asked about Pierre, about Langevin, about whether she ever cried. She answered politely but distantly. "My life is in my work," she said, "not in my feelings." Worse, the gift came with a condition she hadn't anticipated. The radium was donated to her personally, not to her institute. French law required that scientific materials be held by institutions, not individuals. For weeks, lawyers debated the transfer. Marie, exhausted and humiliated, feared the radium would be lost in bureaucracy. Finally, with help from the French government and American diplomats, the radium was secured for the Radium Institute in Paris. The crisis passed, but the experience left her wary. She had come for science and left with a lesson. Even generosity can carry chains. Still, the trip changed her. For the first time, she saw the power of public goodwill. She saw women who looked up to her, not as a widow or a scandal, but as a pioneer. In lecture halls across America, young female students filled the front rows, eyes wide with possibility. "If she can do it," they whispered, "so can I." On the voyage home, she sat on the deck, watching the Atlantic roll. Her body ached, her eyes burned. But in her cabin, safely locked in a lead case, the radium glowed faintly, a gift from strangers who believed in light. And for the first time in years, Marie allowed herself to hope. After her return from America, Marie Curie's body began to betray her. The same radiation that had revealed the secrets of the atom was now eroding her from within. Her hands, once steady enough to weigh milligrams of radium, now trembled uncontrollably. Her eyes, clouded by cataracts, required multiple surgeries, performed without full anesthesia, as her weakened system couldn't tolerate it. She suffered from chronic fatigue, kidney pain, and recurrent infections. Doctors whispered the word, aplastic anemia, a death sentence caused by bone marrow destroyed by years of radiation exposure. Yet she refused to stop. She rose before dawn, wrapped her aching joints in wool, and walked to the Radium Institute in Paris. There, she oversaw research, mentored young scientists, especially women, and guided her daughter Irene and son-in-law Frederick Joliet in their experiments on artificial radioactivity. She knew her time was short. Every day became a race against decay. Fame followed her, but she treated it like a burden. She declined honorary degrees, turned down interviews, and refused to profit from her discoveries. When a Hollywood studio offered her $50,000 to consult on a biopic, she declined. "My life is not entertainment," she said. "It is work," but the world would not let her disappear. In 1922, she was elected to the prestigious International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation, a forerunner to UNESCO, where she worked alongside Albert Einstein, who called her the only person I know who is not corrupted by fame. They exchanged letters filled with warmth and mutual respect. He admired her integrity. She admired his vision. In a world increasingly driven by nationalism and greed, They were two beacons of reason. She also dedicated herself to building a second radium institute in her beloved, partitioned homeland of Poland. In 1932, the Maria Skłodowska-Curie Institute of Oncology opened in Warsaw. She traveled there one last time, frail but radiant, to place a capsule of radium, donated by the French government, in its vault. "This is for Poland," she told the crowd. "For the children who will never know war." Back in Paris, her health worsened. She spent weeks in Alpine sanatoriums, seeking clean air for her failing lungs. Yet even there, she carried notebooks. She reviewed papers. She wrote letters of recommendation for students. Her mind remained sharp, even as her body failed. In July 1934, she developed a high fever. Doctors diagnosed a severe kidney infection likely accelerated by decades of radiation damage. She was moved to a cottage in Saint-Célimos in the French Alps, where Irene and Eve kept vigil. On July 4, 1934, Marie Curie died quietly in her sleep. She was 66 years old. The cause of death was listed as aplastic anemia, almost certainly caused by prolonged exposure to ionizing radiation. But at the time, no one fully understood the danger. Her notebooks, clothes, furniture, even her cookbook, were so contaminated that they remain stored in lead-lined boxes at France's Bibliothèque Nationale. To this day, researchers must sign waivers and wear protective gear to handle them. Her body was placed in a lead-lined coffin, a final acknowledgement of the invisible force she had carried in her bones. But her legacy did not die with her. Just 2 years later, Irene and Frederick Joliot Curie won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for discovering artificial radioactivity, fulfilling Marie's dream of a scientific dynasty. And in every cancer patient treated with radiation therapy, in every woman who steps into a laboratory, in every child who learns that curiosity is courage, Marie Curie still glows, not with radium, but with light that no darkness can extinguish. Marie Curie was buried on a cold July day in 1934, in a simple ceremony attended by scientists, students, and a few friends who had seen past her fame to the quiet woman beneath. She was laid to rest beside Pier in Sceaux, France, her body sealed in a lead-lined coffin, not for secrecy, but for safety. The radiation that had lived in her bones for over 30 years was still active. It still is. Today, her notebooks rest in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, stored in custom-lead boxes. To read them, researchers must sign liability waivers and wear protective gear. Even her cookbook registers radiation levels above background a century later. She didn't just discover radioactivity. She became part of it. But her true legacy isn't in contaminated paper. It's in the lives she changed. During World War I, her Petites Curies saved over 1 million soldiers. That same mobile X-ray technology evolved into the diagnostic imaging that now guides every modern hospital, from MRI to CT scans. Radiation therapy, born from her work, treats half of all cancer patients today. She didn't set out to cure disease, but her light made it possible. She also shattered invisible barriers. The first woman to win a Nobel Prize. The first person, and still the only woman, to win 2 Nobels in 2 different sciences. The first female professor at the Sorbonne. The founder of 2 world-class research institutes, one in Paris, one in Warsaw. And she did it all as a foreigner, a widow, and a mother, in a world that told her to stay silent. Her daughter Irene followed in her footsteps, winning the 1935 Nobel Prize in Chemistry with her husband, Frederick Joliot Curie, for discovering artificial radioactivity, proving that the Curie legacy was not just personal, but generational. Yet Marie's greatest gift may be the quiet permission she gave to others. In labs across the globe, young women look at her photograph and think, if she could do it, so can I. In 2023, over 40% of physics PhDs in the U.S. were awarded to women, a number unimaginable in Marie's time. Not because the world changed overnight, but because she refused to wait for it to change. Even her flaws make her human. She ignored the dangers of radiation, not out of recklessness, but out of devotion to discovery. She loved deeply, mourned fiercely, and fought quietly. She was not a saint. She was something rarer, a person who chose truth over comfort, work over fame, and light over fear. In 1995, France granted her the highest honor, reburial in the Pantheon in Paris, the Mausoleum of National Heroes. She became the first woman entombed there on her own merits. Her coffin, still lead-lined, lies beneath the inscription, Physician, du fois prix Nobel. No mention of peer, no mention of gender, just her name, her science, her legacy. And still, her light endures. It's in the glow of a radiation oncology ward where a patient receives life-saving treatment. It's in the hands of a girl in Nairobi building her first Geiger counter. It's in the silence of a lab at midnight where someone somewhere is asking a question no one has asked before. Marie Curie did not seek immortality. She sought understanding. And in doing so, she became eternal. For as long as humanity reaches for knowledge, as long as we dare to look into the dark and say, there must be light, Marie Curie will be there, not as a statue, not as a myth, but as a quiet voice in the bones of science itself. The best things in life are not things, she once said. They are the truths we uncover, and hers still glow.